Lee Tower. It was a wonderful Art Deco building that spread out over the whole area here. I can't believe it's been over 20 years since I filmed a short piece on the history of Lee Tower. It was just a minute or so long and was my first effort to record my thoughts on this subject. There was no time to expand on this as the project work took over at the time. On a bright side, at least I don't look any different. Now, having been retired recently, 10 years I've spent painting local historic scenes, for which the subject matter seems to be somewhat exhausted. I've started making video documentaries to complement these paintings. I've made a couple of short videos already, but now I've progressed into a more detailed and researched approach. So let me share with you now the history of the pier and tower complex at Lyon-Solent. If you're reading any local history books about Lyon-Solent, it's highly likely that the subject of the tower there is one of the first things to come up. This iconic Art Deco building was the dominant feature for miles around. It was the Spinnaker Tower of its time. Now, the history behind the tower has been well documented. Investment into this iconic structure to promote the area as a destination resort did not achieve the lasting aims of the developers and has, in my view, a romanticized theme of endeavor. I can still recall going up to that tower as a youngster, 120 feet up above the Solent. So exciting. Today, this car park behind me occupies the original location. But just perhaps we can get an idea of how it looked all those years ago. In researching a project, the source information is critical in that the provenance of statements made can be proven and not just hearsay. Whilst talking to people about the tower is very informative, it is contemporary information that offer portals into the past. I was fortunate to spend some time with Rich Patterson, a local historian specialising in Lyon-Solent. In addition to the many photographs he possessed and his extensive knowledge of the history of his hometown, he shared with me an abundance of newspaper clippings, some of which are shown here. These map out the story of the tower and its futile struggle to survive commercially. I painted two views of this location, and they're set either side of 1935 when major changes took place. This image is of the pier entrance set in 1935, which will be its final year before being demolished. This second image is set 23 years later, when the tower dominated the sea. To paint these buildings from unique viewpoints, 3D modelling is required to provide an accurate reference with which to sketch the outline of a painting. The reason for painting this scene was to show how the entrance to the pier looked for the 50 years until being replaced by the tower in 1935. The access to the pier was through the centre walkway in the brick structure shown here. At 750 feet long, the iron pier was opened on the 3rd of April 1888. It was severely damaged by fire in 1932 and partly removed as an anti-invasion measure in 1940, until finally being demolished in 1958. The aircraft is a Southampton-built Supermarine Walrus, which had just entered service at the time and would have been based at the close-by Royal Navy Air Station, which would later become HMS Daedalus in 1939. This aerial shot, which looks to be taken around the 1920s, is interesting in that The area occupied by the shops and cafes on the seafront was then a field surrounded by trees. It seems perhaps that the marks on the field indicate it might have been a cricket pitch at the time. This observation is supported by what looks to be a sports pavilion at the top corner. The shape of the pier entrance building and its immediate surroundings would be represented in the forthcoming design of the tower complex. This is a well-published photo, but I wanted to include it here as it portrays a feel-good factor of a small seaside resort of the time. With 3 daughters of my own, I can relate to this charming Edwardian photo. Clearly, sunscreen would have not been required for these beachgoers. This is the view that led to the pier in the past by the car park on the seafront today. And this is how it would have looked 100 years ago. When I set out painting local historic scenes, my first was Stubbington Village. That is my home these days. But once I'd mastered how to produce such paintings, my second painting just had to be Lee Tower. And it's no surprise that today, it's still my best-selling print. This view includes the original Bluebird Cafe, located in the wooden single-storey building at the lower left. The house at the lower right has long since been replaced with a block of flats. The tower complex was built in 1935 to a design by architects Yates, Cook and Derbyshire. Several local contractors were engaged to construct the complex, the main one being A.A. Prestige of Leon-Solent. Today I'm in Stubbington, going to the Holyrood Church to meet the Reverend Colin Prestige, very much a local lad who grew up in Leon-Solent in a house that his grandfather had built. But his family connection to the construction of the tower is the real reason I just have to meet him. Hi, Colin. Pleased to meet you. Thanks for taking the time out to see me today.
Lovely to see you. My pleasure.
Okay. But tell me, what is it that links you to the tower complex?
Well, my great-grandfather, Alfred Alexander Prestige, was the principal contractor for the building of the tower. He was one of the directors of Solent Properties Limited, and the planning application was in his name. He built 3 properties which he subsequently lived in. So he started at one end at Sutton House, then he built one called Diana, a bit down toward where the fishing club is now, and then one called Sunray House, which is right on the corner of Wootton Road.
So tell me a bit more about the tower.
Well, the tower, in a way, was his crowning glory, built in 1935, and it involved a huge workforce, of which 2 of my great-grandfather's sons were involved.
So how long did it take to build, and what was the cost?
I don't know how much it actually cost to build, but I do know the footings were started in 1934, and the old Pierhead building was demolished in the October of that year. And then from then on, building continued at quite a pace, and by July 1935, they had essentially finished it. And they held the first dance there on the 27th of July 1935 with a top-class dance band. What is interesting about the building is that they built it from west to east. So there's pictures from the time that show the wing which had the dance hall in virtually complete, whereas the bit that had the cinema room was only halfway through construction. And a couple of other interesting stories. One is that all the footings were done by hand, using spades and picks, so there were no mechanical diggers. All the bricks used were local bricks, dug and fired in kilns in Leon-Solent, and all the ancillary companies were from the local area. And one little story that was told to me by my grandfather, and I've had more recently confirmed by an elderly relative, was that they had some mosaic tower work which was done by Italian craftsmen, and at their insistence they did it at night so that no one could see them do it.
So tell me a little bit about the opening ceremony.
Well, it was officially opened on Boxing Day 1935, and Admiral Sir Arthur Wastrel, who was a former Commander-in-Chief of Portsmouth, did the opening ceremony along with the Mayor and the Mayoress of Gosport. And besides all the usual speeches, there was films shown in the newly created cinema, 950-seat cinema, and there was a picture of my grandfather in the brochure with this inscription. It says it's been erected by one of our best-known builders and townsmen, Mr. A. Prestige of Leon-Solent, and it need hardly be added that it will remain a monument of craftsmanship and energy to him for all time. Unfortunately, it was a bit sadly short-lived.
Yes, no sad. Well, I'm really excited because you've got an artifact to show me that was presented to your father or grandfather at the opening ceremony.
Yes, well, I've got this tea set. On the 30th of August 1935, my great-grandparents held a special dinner for all the people that had been involved in the tower's construction. And at that time of singing and dancing, quite a big celebration, my great-grandfather, Alfred Alexander, was presented with a box of cigars, which haven't survived, not surprisingly. But my great-grandmother, Diana Elizabeth, was presented with this lovely silver tea set. After her death, it got passed to my grandfather and then to my father, who had it in a display case in our dining room at 7 High Street, where I grew up, until my mother died.
It's been hidden away from the public eye since.
It'll be passed on to my son, so it's been very much kept in the family, as I'll say.
So the tower was built, and then he had input to the blocks of the commercial premises opposite the tower, didn't he?
Yeah, they were Prestige built too. And what is interesting in the time frame of them being built, there's a picture which came out of a family photograph album showing the tower. And when you look at the tower, you can see that it's not quite finished. There's some work to be done around the actual top of it. And in the foreground, there are the builders' huts and all their building equipment. And from what I can make out, they must have started in a sort of about 35, worked their way down Pier Street, along the front. And then there are 2 blocks. If you look at the flats on there, and 2 distinct blocks joined together. So there was an article that appeared in the Evening News of January that year that tells how they built, the workmen had dug up a live 18-inch shell, which they think would have been fired at a Zeppelin that came over during the Great War. And my great-uncle Billy, my grandfather's brother, instead of calling the army, as you might expect, he picked it up, carried it to the end of the pier and lobbed it into the sea.
There's lovely stories. There was one thing about is that all the tower and its story, and I've talked to quite a few people now. What's your feeling about the decision to pull it down?
Well, I think it's very sad. It was a wonderful piece of Art Deco building, and I'm sure, had it survived, it would have been listed by now. The sad thing was that, in a way, it started as a beacon, a symbol of hope to a brave new world, and ended rather as a white elephant, and a rather dirty and dilapidated one at that. The reality is that the tower seemed to have lost money almost from the word go, and the death of my great-grandfather in July 1937 at the age of 59 of bowel cancer didn't do much to help the whole process. It got into trouble almost immediately after that, probably because, he was one of the mortgagees, and, it just affected the whole financial footings of the tower.
It was so sad to see it go.
Yes. I mean, I'd love to think that it would have been a wonderful focal point as it had been 20 years previously, because in the 1950s, my parents met at a dance there, as did many couples during that time. It was the place you went to in Leon-Solent. It was absolutely focal point.
Wasn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much, Colin. This programme shows the cinema opening ceremony at 6 p.m. on Boxing Day 1935. After a short cartoon, the first film shown was a British comedy, Marry the Girl. And as was normal in the not-too-distant past, a second film was shown. This was In Town Tonight. Well, there must have been some leverage by the management, as this was 1 month ahead of its release date. This is one of my favourite photos. It shows the construction of the Art Deco style building opposite the tower complex. Its design was complementary to that of the tower, and is thankfully still there today. The tower complex was sold to Gosport Borough Council for £56,000 in 1939. That's £4.7 million in today's money. Bad timing, considering World War II would break out later the same year. The Art Deco style tower stood over 120 feet high, and with its complex, including a restaurant, ballroom and cinema, latterly a bowling alley, became an iconic destination to visit over the coming 36 years. During World War II, when invasion by Germany seemed imminent in 1940, Pier was partially demolished to reduce its availability to any landing forces. The tower was painted in a camouflage pattern to reduce its appearance, as it was being used as a navigation aid by the German Air Force, or the Luftwaffe, heading inland to other targets. The tower complex, which had been abandoned for the war, was requisitioned in 1944 by the Allied command structure for the organisation of the tug fleet. The acronym for this was COTUG, Combined Operations Tug. This was needed to help ship the mulberry caissons around the Solent and then on to Normandy for the invasion of France, D-Day. The cinema became its headquarters, with the tower being used as a control centre. At last the tug fleet had a place to tie up, even if its skippers initially had to communicate with the tower by bullhorn until additional radio channels were established. In particular, the views across from the top of the tower were of great use in overseeing the mass build-up of vessels. These 4 Nissen huts were installed on the tennis courts due to the high number of personnel involved in the coordination of the invasion. This view from the tower in 1960 shows a concrete flat-roofed building on the path leading up from the seafront. On closer inspection, there is signage on the entrance with the acronym ARP, which stands for Air Raid Precautions, which was to change to the Civil Defence Service in 1941. This was a base for the air raid wardens, who policed many requirements, such as making sure window lights were blacked out during this period. The war is over, and the tower complex is shown having its camouflage paint removed. The scaffolding on the front shows the presence of workers carrying out this task, whilst at the top right, part of the tower can be seen, and it is clear that removal of the camouflage paint has not yet begun on this part of the building. Local resident Dory Crabb's father, Bill Schilling, was employed by local builder Early Young to remove the camouflage paint from the tower. It took several efforts using caustic soda to remove the paint. Here he is with his workmates at the top of the tower, just under the viewing platform. On the left of the photograph can be seen the horizontal decorative slats that form part of the distinctive Art Deco style of the tower. Here is the sun terrace on the west side of the tower. Note the red seam line. These were used as collection boxes after the war to raise funds for the Shipwrecked Mariners Society. 200 were donated by the Admiralty, and incredibly, 60 still survive to this day, one down at Gosport Ferry. Here's one we can date. June 1953, Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. The cinema was very popular in the 1940s and 50s. I recall a conversation with an expat now living in Australia when researching my painting for this complex. He fondly remembered queuing up to see the premiere of the film Rock Around the Clock at the Tower Cinema in 1956. I'm here today with Steve Hammond. He's from Gosport Drones, and what we're going to do is take this drone up 120 feet up to where the top of the tower was, and we're going to get a view of just how it looked all those years ago. So Steve, let's take it on up. Now that the drone has reached the correct height for the viewing platform, it has been positioned exactly over the location of the original tower. Now the panoramic view has not been seen since the end of 1970 can be revealed once again. From this elevated viewpoint, the area once occupied by the tower complex can be seen as the car park that occupies the site today. So let's put the tower complex back into its original location to give us an idea as to how this scene would have looked before 1971. One of the books I authored and published in 2006 was Gosport Reflections. I've included a page from the book that featured the tower and pier. Whilst the books offered a now and then format to look at how scenes have changed over time, the nature of video has enabled this format to be used in a different way. The superimposition of the old view over the new one provides an exact reference to be drawn by the viewer. The tower's demise has been the subject of much debate, centering around the condition of the structure due to erosion and the prohibitive costs to Gosport Council to maintain it in a period where holidaymakers tend to travel abroad in large numbers. The cinema was the first part of the complex to run into difficulties and closed in 1958 after a period where it was used as a bingo club and part-time wrestling venue. It was leased to Buccaneer Bowling in 1964, but this venture failed to stem the tide of continual financial loss. Today I'm meeting local Facebook-based historian Richard Hulse to discuss his involvement in the demolition of the tower. I'm going to meet him in a place he used to frequent when working for Treloar's during the demolition process. I'm talking, of course, about the iconic Bluebird Cafe. Let's hear what he's got to say. Hi, Rich.
I know. No, I am. Right.
Not bad. So, how does it feel to be one of the people that destroyed or took down one of our most iconic buildings in Leigh?
I was a 16-year-old apprentice fitter. My father worked on the same company, and my brother did, Treloar's and Son, who demolished lots of buildings around Gosport since the 50s in the area. And it was my job to maintain the machines that they broke down. Namely the big 22-ton crane with the demolition ball and the caterpillars and the JCBs. I had several visits here over the 2 months that it took to demolish Leigh Tower. One of the things that did happen was I did hear that they, as the machine was travelling across the site, it disappeared down into one of the cellars, which was near where the sunken memorial is today.
Yeah.
And I can only think that that's why the east wing was demolished and might have damaged some of the structural part of it.
That explains a big hole in the ground where the memorial is.
Yes, yeah.
Do you have any regrets about taking it down?
Yeah, I do. I remember at the time talking to my dad. It's a shame it's coming down because I'd been up there with my dad several times as a young boy. And he said, well, we're just doing our job. That's all we could do, really.
Yeah. So as time went by, when it first came down, it was a bit of a wreck and all that kind of stuff. But then there became a bit of a sympathetic backlash to say, why did we lose our tower? How long would you say that happened after you had knocked it down, or Treloar's had knocked it down?
It took about several years, and I noticed people saying they should have kept it, but at the time it was deemed as an eyesore, and people wanted it down, and it was given the necessary planning action through Hampshire County Council, and it went up to Parliament to give the okay to demolish it.
Oh, yeah. So, do you think it should have been saved?
Yes, I do. An iconic bit of building, Art Deco style, it would have put Gosport and Leon Solent on the map, I think.
And you lent me some very interesting video clips of the tower coming down. Were you in that at all?
No, I wasn't, but my father was the demolition foreman for Treloar's, and he was instructed to demolish it by the government at the time and the council at the time. But some of the people I've known in the video, I do recognise a lot of them. Yeah.
And what about, there's a clip there showing that the tower came down, and then later on, as you mentioned earlier, the cinema piece came down, or the bowling alley.
Yeah.
Can you recall how long it was between the first lot coming down and the second thing?
Quite a long time, because I've seen photos of like car park on the west side being used, and the east side block was still there.
Oh, yeah.
So there must have been some sort of structural problem there, I think.
Yeah. Sad, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Let's say it was very popular in the 50s, and then it became the Buccaneer, and the bowling alley, and lots of people reminisce how it was in the Teddy Boy era, you know.
Yeah, it was. Well, it's been really nice to meet you, and so glad that we've had a chance to speak. And that's it. It's the end of the iconic building that was once the centre point of Leigh.
Yeah.
Once the decision had been made to demolish the complex, there was an effort to save the structure that housed the former cinema. But when Treloar's undertook the demolition, this building was deemed unsavable and was the final part of the complex to go. Despite a crowded public meeting voting overwhelmingly to retain it as a community centre, in 1971, sadly, all trace of the tower complex had been removed after only 36 years of existence. Reassuringly, the War Memorial has survived all of the changes surrounding it. Appearing frequently in this recording, it's now relocated from the position it held for the best part of a century. It stands as a beacon of reflection of events that place many of the issues facing us today into perspective. It's been 57 years since I was last up here. The view is still breathtaking as the sea breeze drifts gently through what's left of my hair. All colours are vibrant. I can smell and hear the sea as the sun warms my face. None of these sensations are experienced when viewing from the Spinnaker Tower today, where tinted glass deprives us of these sensations. I can't think of a better place to conclude my journey through the history of the tower at Leon Solent. I really wish it was still here to enjoy. But as the old saying goes, you don't know what you got until it's gone.